5 black cards lay on a velvet tray, each one stamped with a single word in silver: unlimited. The room froze for a heartbeat. 5 women stared, their eyes wide with the kind of hunger that makes diamonds look cheap. Then almost at once, laughter bubbled up, sharp, glittering, nervous. At the edge of the room, Maria, the maid, gripped a tray of untouched water glasses. No one noticed her. They never did. She kept her eyes down, though every word burned its way into her ears. The billionaire CEO leaned back in his chair, his tone as calm as a man tossing crumbs to birds. "Take them," he said. "No limits, no rules. Show me who you really are." Hands moved fast. One card gone, then another, then all 5. The women's voices rose, dreaming aloud of jets, jewels, empires, as if the world had just been placed in their palms. She knew better than to look up, but something in his voice made her risk it. For the first time that night, the billionaire's eyes flicked her way, just for a second long enough to make her breath catch. And in that second, Maria understood one thing: this game wasn't meant for them. It was meant for her. If someone handed you an unlimited card and said no rules, what's the very first thing you'd do with it? Drop it in the comments. I want to see where your heart would lead you. Maria woke before dawn, the same way she always did, with the rattle of the buses below her window and the sharp chill of a room that never quite held warmth. The small apartment she shared with her mother and young niece was neat but worn. Paint peeling around the doorframe, the hum of a fridge older than she was, the faint cough from her mother's bedroom that reminded Maria why she kept working, no matter how heavy her eyes felt. Her routine was as predictable as the sunrise: black coffee with too much sugar to fight off fatigue, a quick check of her mother's medicines lined up on the counter, then a quiet kiss on her niece's forehead before slipping out into the grey morning. The city was still half asleep, but Maria walked fast, apron folded neatly in her bag, shoes scuffed but clean. She believed that even if life gave her little, she could still carry herself with dignity. At the mansion, silence reigned. Staff drifted through wide corridors like shadows, polishing surfaces already gleaming, arranging flowers that would wilt by evening. Maria tied her apron, pinned her hair, and fell into place. She was invisible, and invisibility kept her safe. Still, she noticed things others ignored. The way the billionaire always paused by one small painting in the hall, the way his guests grew louder after the 3rd glass, the way wealth didn't hide loneliness, it magnified it. The 5 women had begun to appear more often, arriving in sleek cars with mirrored windows, their perfumes filling the air before they even stepped inside. They never remembered her name. Sometimes they called her girl, other times they didn't bother with words at all, only gestures. Maria smiled politely and swallowed the sting. She knew her worth, even if they didn't. That night, as she ironed the napkins to sharp folds, she overheard the staff whispering, "The boss has a surprise planned." Their voices carried the kind of nervous curiosity that spread quickly in a house where nothing stayed secret for long. Maria didn't ask questions. She never did. But she felt the weight of those words pressing against her chest. Surprises in this house rarely meant good news for people like her. When the billionaire entered the dining hall later, his steps measured and his gaze cool, the entire staff stilled. He carried an energy that silenced rooms without effort. Maria had served him countless times, yet she could never quite read his face. Tonight, however, there was something different, an edge of anticipation, a hint of calculation, as if he were about to set something in motion that none of them could predict. She thought of her mother again, of the unpaid pharmacy bill folded in her wallet. She thought of her niece's shy smile when she asked if Santa would come this year. Maria pressed her palm against the ironed linen to steady her nerves. Whatever was about to unfold, she would keep her head down like always. She had no place in the games of the rich, but life, she would soon discover, had been chosen differently for her. Do you think money changes people, or does it only reveal who they've been all along? Share your thoughts, I'd love to see what you believe. The cards were still fresh in Maria's memory the next morning. She replayed the moment in her mind as she scrubbed the marble counter, 5 women clutching power that could buy anything, their laughter echoing under the chandelier. The sound stayed with her, not because she envied them, but because of the billionaire's eyes, those few seconds when he looked at her as though she were part of a game she hadn't agreed to play. By noon, the house was in chaos. Staff darted up and down the hallways with lists in hand, fielding phone calls from jewelers, private jet pilots, luxury boutiques. The women had wasted no time. Each card was already slicing into the world like a blade, cutting open vaults and closets, unlocking indulgences most people would never touch. Maria carried trays of tea to the veranda, where two of the women were comparing notes on who could outspend the other. One mentioned Paris. The other laughed about renting out an entire island just because she could. Their voices were bright, but beneath the brightness was something sharper. Competition, maybe even cruelty. Later in the kitchen, Maria caught a whisper from the butler. Midnight. They must return with proof. First purchases. It's a contest. The words made her pause. Contest. The billionaire hadn't said it aloud, but of course that's what it was. He liked to measure people, to see what they'd do when tempted. Maria pushed the thought aside and focused on her duties. Still, the weight of it lingered. Proof. She imagined them parading back into the mansion with bags, receipts, treasures beyond measure. It wasn't just about money, it was about power, about who could impress him most. Her shift ended late. She slipped out through the servants' entrance, shoulders aching, apron stuffed into her bag. Outside, the city was restless. Neon lights buzzed, and car horns tangled with the noise of late-night crowds. Maria pulled her coat tighter against the wind and walked toward the bus stop. Halfway there, her phone buzzed. She hesitated, then checked the screen. Pharmacy closed again. Mother's medication out of stock. Try tomorrow. Her throat tightened. She shoved the phone back into her pocket, eyes burning. Tomorrow was too far away when someone you loved was suffering tonight. She sat at the bus stop bench, cold metal pressing through her coat. As she waited, she spotted one of the billionaire's women across the street, stepping out of a sleek car. Shopping bags swung from both arms, the logo of a luxury boutique glowing under the streetlights. A driver carried even more bags behind her. She laughed into her phone, the sound sharp in the night. Maria turned away quickly, ashamed of the bitterness rising in her chest. It wasn't envy, it was exhaustion. She had scrubbed, folded, lifted, and bent until her hands were raw, and still she couldn't afford the medicine her mother needed. Meanwhile, a stranger flaunted 10 dresses she might wear once, if ever. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes. Maria climbed aboard, staring out the window as the city blurred past. Somewhere in the blur, a thought flickered, dangerous, persistent. What if she had one of those cards? Just one night, just one purchase. Wouldn't she spend it on something that truly mattered? She shook her head hard, forcing the thought away. That wasn't her world. She was a maid. She was invisible. She had no card. But life, as she was about to discover, has a way of slipping keys into the pockets of those who least expect them. Imagine you had one chance to use an unlimited card, not for yourself, but for someone you love. What would you buy first? Share it in the comments. The mansion was never quiet at night, though it pretended to be. Beyond the polished corridors and locked doors, whispers traveled like smoke. That evening, the air itself felt heavier, as if the house knew what was coming. Midnight drew closer, and the billionaire's game ticked forward. Maria had returned for her second shift, apron tied, hair pinned back. She moved silently through the dining hall, preparing glasses and folding napkins, as though nothing unusual was about to happen. But she could feel it in the rhythm of the staff. Everyone moved faster, voices clipped, nerves sharp. At 11, the first woman swept back into the house, her heels clicking like small hammers on the marble. She carried boxes stacked high, laughing as she dropped them onto the table. Dresses, handbags, jewelry, all spilling out like a personal treasure chest. Unlimited, she sang. Do you see? No end. Minutes later, another arrived with bags from Paris itself, flown overnight. Perfume bottles, each one worth more than Maria's yearly pay, clinked against each other as she poured them onto the table. Her grin was bright, but her eyes were restless. The third woman dragged in artwork, paintings, sculptures, claiming them with the smugness of someone who thought taste could be bought in bulk. The fourth woman returned from the skies, video of her in a private jet already making the rounds on social media. She showed it off proudly, the billionaire watching from the corner with no expression at all. And then came the fifth. She entered late, slower than the rest, carrying only a slim envelope. No laughter, no theatrics, just a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She handed the envelope to the billionaire. He opened it, glanced once, and said nothing. But Maria noticed how his fingers lingered on the paper longer than they had on any jewel or painting. Maria set a tray of glasses on the sideboard, but her curiosity pressed against her chest like a stone. What could be inside that envelope? Why did his gaze sharpen for only that? The billionaire raised his hand. You've shown me the power of desire, he said. His voice carried through the hall, calm but edged. "But true worth is not found in what you buy. It's in what you choose." The women shifted uneasily. For the first time that night, their laughter faltered. Maria bent to collect empty boxes from the floor. As she did, she noticed something gleaming by the leg of a chair, a card. One of the 5. It must have slipped, unseen, while the woman unpacked her treasures. Maria froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The black surface reflected her own wide eyes. Silver letters stared back, unlimited. Her heart thudded hard. She glanced around. No one was watching her. The women were busy showing off, their voices overlapping. The billionaire stood at the head of the room, distracted by the envelope. The staff kept their eyes carefully elsewhere. Maria's hand trembled as she slid the card under the napkins she carried, just to hide it, just until she could figure out what to do. She felt the weight of it press into her palm as if it were alive. When she stepped back into the kitchen, the noise of the dining hall faded behind her, but her pulse did not. She leaned against the counter, staring at the napkins, at the corner of black peeking through. It was real. She hadn't imagined it. One of the cards, hers now, whether she wanted it or not. And for the first time in her life, Maria felt both terrified and powerful in the same breath. If you stumbled upon an unlimited card by accident, would you keep it or hand it back? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Maria hid the card deep in her apron pocket, every step heavier than the last. She felt like the walls themselves might shout out what she carried. In the kitchen, pots clattered, knives struck cutting boards, and the air smelled of roasted meat and herbs. To everyone else, it was just another night of serving the rich. To Maria, it was the night her life tilted. She slipped into the small storeroom, her heart racing. Pulling the card into the dim light, she studied it closer. Sleek black, silver lettering, smooth as glass. It looked like any other piece of plastic, yet it held the weight of worlds. She imagined the doors it could unlock, the things it could buy, things her family needed, things she had prayed for in silence. But her stomach churned. This wasn't hers. If anyone noticed it missing, suspicion could fall on her. She would be finished. Her job gone, her reputation ruined. Worse, what if they accused her of stealing it on purpose? Her fingers clenched around it. She thought of her mother's coughing, of her niece's worn shoes, of the quiet despair that hung over their home. For them, this card could be salvation. The door creaked, and Maria nearly jumped out of her skin. It was Anna, the youngest maid. She raised an eyebrow. "Why are you hiding in here?" Maria shoved the card back into her apron. "Just catching my breath," she said quickly. Anna smirked. "Don't let them see you standing still. They'll think you're lazy." She disappeared before Maria could reply. Alone again, Maria pressed the card flat against her chest. She knew she had to make a decision. Midnight was coming. The women would parade their purchases, each flaunting their greed. And then there was her, an invisible servant with a secret that could change everything. Hours later, the house gathered once more in the great hall. The women boasted, their piles of wealth glowing under the chandeliers. The billionaire sat silent, watching with the cold amusement of a man dissecting a puzzle. Maria stood at the back, hands trembling as she poured champagne. She could feel the card burning in her pocket like fire. She couldn't keep it hidden forever. Then, without warning, his voice cut through the chatter. "There should be 5 cards on the table. Where is the last one?" The hall went still. The women froze, their laughter silenced. All eyes turned toward the empty tray. Maria's breath caught. The billionaire's gaze swept the room slowly, deliberate and sharp. "Bring me the 5th card," he said. Silence stretched. The women shifted uncomfortably, muttering to each other. One insisted she'd had hers moments ago. Another accused someone else of misplacing it. Tension thickened like smoke, and then Maria made the choice that would change her life. She stepped forward, apron trembling against her knees. With careful hands she placed the black card on the velvet tray before him. The women gasped. Whispers darted across the room. The billionaire's eyes lifted to hers, steady, unblinking. For the first time, Maria didn't look away. He studied her for what felt like forever, then picked up the card and turned it between his fingers. "Interesting," he murmured. His smile was slight, unreadable. "Very interesting." And at that moment, Maria realized she had not returned the card. She had entered the game. The air in the hall turned colder after Maria laid the card down. Whispers spread like wildfire, eyes narrowing, lips curling with suspicion. The 5 women looked her over as though she had crawled out from the floorboards. Their expressions said what their words did not. "How dare the maid touch what belongs to us?" He only set the card aside and raised his glass as though nothing unusual had happened. That silence was worse than words. It left the women to spin their own stories. By the next morning, Maria could feel the weight of their stares. Every hallway she walked through carried hushed laughter, sideways glances, whispers that stopped the moment she entered a room. One of the women passed her in the corridor and let her purse brush hard against Maria's arm, as though punishing her for existing. Another simply muttered, "Thief," under her breath. Maria worked faster than ever, scrubbing, polishing, ironing, trying to drown out the noise. But even the staff had begun to look at her differently. They had heard the rumors too. Some avoided her eyes. A few looked at her with quiet pity, as though she had already sealed her fate. At home things were no easier. Her mother's health was slipping, each breath weaker than the last. The pharmacy kept delaying the medicine, saying it was on back order. Her niece sat at the kitchen table, homework spread out, pretending not to notice her grandmother's cough echoing through the walls. Maria felt stretched thin, pulled in two directions, one by duty, the other by despair. And still the image of the card haunted her. She had returned it, yes, but for those few minutes it had been hers. She had felt its weight, the possibility of what it could do. It was enough to plant a seed that refused to die. Days later, the storm finally broke. The billionaire called for a gathering, the women once again parading their excess like trophies. Maria moved along the edge of the room, carrying trays, trying to stay invisible, but she couldn't escape their eyes. One of the women, the sharpest-tongued of them all, suddenly spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I wonder if the maid has her own list now, perhaps a mansion of her own. Or maybe a diamond necklace hidden in her apron." Laughter erupted, cruel and cutting. Maria froze, cheeks burning. She wanted to disappear into the floor. The billionaire said nothing, his face unreadable, which only made it worse. Her chest tightened. She thought of her mother at home, struggling to breathe, of her niece walking to school in worn shoes. Shame and anger twisted together inside her until she could hardly breathe herself. That night, after her shift, Maria walked through the rain with tears mixing into the drops on her face. Her coat clung to her skin, her shoes soaked through, the city lights blurred into streaks, and the noise of traffic drowned out her thoughts. She felt beaten, smaller than ever before. By the time she reached her building, she was trembling. She stood at the door for a long moment, unable to go inside. She couldn't bear for her mother and niece to see her break. She pressed her forehead against the cold wood and whispered, "What am I doing? What am I supposed to do?" For the first time in years, Maria felt powerless, not just poor, not just tired, but truly powerless, as though no matter how hard she fought, the world would always press her back into silence. And at that moment, she believed she had already lost. Maria woke to the sound of her mother's cough echoing through the thin walls. It wasn't the gentle wrath she had grown used to. It was harsher, deeper, like something tearing inside. She rushed to the bedside, holding a glass of water to trembling lips. Her mother smiled faintly, the kind of smile meant to reassure, though her eyes told the truth. She was growing weaker. When the coughing eased, Maria sat on the edge of the bed, her hands still shaking. She looked around the room, paint curling on the walls, medicine bottles lined up but half empty, a blanket patched and repatched. She had given everything she had, yet it never seemed enough. Her niece peeked through the door, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Is Grandma okay?" she whispered. Maria forced her voice to steady. "She will be. Go back to bed, Carino." The little girl nodded, though worry lingered on her small face. Maria waited until she disappeared, then dropped her head into her hands. Tears pressed behind her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. She had cried enough nights already, and still the world hadn't changed. That was when it hit her. Clear, sharp, undeniable. She thought of the women with their careless laughter, their mountains of things they didn't need. She thought of the billionaire's cold gaze, the way he studied people as though they were pieces on a chessboard, and she thought of that card, heavy in her hand, just for those few stolen minutes. It wasn't about envy. It wasn't about greed. It was about choice. She had none, while they had more than they knew what to do with, and maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to take one. Maria rose from the bed and went to the small table where her bag rested. She pulled out her worn wallet, opening it to reveal a scrap of paper folded and refolded until the edges had gone soft. It was her list. Rent, medicine, shoes, food, needs, not wants. Every line on it was written in her own cramped handwriting, each word a quiet prayer. Her hand steadied as she looked at it. She wasn't powerless, not if she chose differently, not if she stopped bowing her head and found the courage to act. By the time she returned to the mansion that afternoon, Maria carried herself differently. Her steps were firm, her shoulders straighter. She still wore the same uniform, but something in her presence had changed. The other maids noticed, exchanging glances, though none dared to ask. When she entered the great hall with a tray of tea, the billionaire's eyes flicked to her. For a moment their gazes locked, and he raised one eyebrow, almost as though he could sense it, the shift inside her. Maria didn't look away this time. She didn't bow her head. She placed the tray down with quiet grace, then stood tall. In that small act, she knew it, she had found her strength again. The game wasn't over. Not yet, and when her moment came, she would no longer be invisible. The storm broke on the night the billionaire gathered everyone once more in the grand hall. Thunder rolled in from the sea, shaking the glass panes, while lightning stitched the sky into crooked patterns. The 5 women arrived, dressed like queens at war, dripping in diamonds, wrapped in silk, each determined to outshine the others. Maria stood with the staff at the edges of the room, tray in hand, but inside she no longer felt small. The billionaire's gaze lingered on her as he welcomed his guests. His voice was smooth, commanding. "You've each shown me what limitless wealth can buy," he said, "but tonight I want to know what it cannot." They had grown used to his approval, to applause for their excess. This was different. One tried to charm him with a laugh, another with a whisper in his ear, but he dismissed them with a glance. Maria's heart pounded. She had not touched another card since that night, but the thought of it, the feel of it, lived inside her. She remembered her mother's cough, her niece's worn shoes, the endless lists that never seemed to shrink. She couldn't hold back any longer. She stepped forward. The tray shook in her hands, but her voice did not. "If I had one of those cards," she said, the room falling silent, "I wouldn't waste it on dresses or jewels. I'd buy medicine, shoes for children, food for families who sleep hungry while we throw feasts no one finishes." The words dropped into the hall like stones into water, rippling outward. Gasps rose from the women, their eyes flashing with fury. The staff froze, terrified. No servant spoke out like this. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, studying her with something close to curiosity. "And you think that makes you different?" he asked. Maria met his gaze without flinching. "I don't think," she said quietly. "I know." The women scoffed, their laughter sharp. One sneered. "She's just a maid. What would she know about choices?" But the billionaire raised his hand, silencing them. He stood, walked slowly to Maria, and for a long moment he simply looked at her, into her eyes, not through her, as he once had. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single card. Black, silver letters glinting under the chandelier. Unlimited. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. He held it out to her. "Show me," he said. Maria's hands trembled as she accepted it, but her voice was steady. "I will." The women's outrage spilled over. One shouted that it was unfair. Another demanded her card back. Their protests rose like a storm, but the billionaire ignored them. His eyes never left Maria. At that moment she understood. This was never about riches. It was about truth. He wanted to see what people revealed when faced with power, and now the test was hers. Maria closed her fingers around the card, her decision already clear. The storm outside raged, rain pelting the windows as though the sky itself demanded to see what would happen next. Maria stood at the center of the hall, the black card in her hand. For a moment, the world felt utterly still, every eye on her, every breath held. She did not waste time with speeches. She simply turned, walked to the side table where a notepad and pen lay unused, and wrote down a list, the same list she carried folded in her old wallet. Medicine, food, school supplies, shelter, needs not wants. When she finished, she placed the card on top of the paper and slid it across the table toward the billionaire. The women gasped in disbelief. "That's it," one snapped. "She could have bought anything in the world, and she chooses this." Maria lifted her chin. "Because these are the things that matter. These are the things that save lives. A mansion means nothing if a child goes hungry. A necklace doesn't comfort a mother who's too weak to stand." Silence fell heavier than thunder. The billionaire picked up the paper. His eyes moved across the line slowly, and for the first time his cold expression softened. He looked at Maria not as a servant, not as a pawn in his game, but as someone who had shown him the truth he had long searched for. He turned back to the women, his voice firm. "You've shown me vanity. She has shown me value." The women shifted, their painted smiles faltering. No laughter came this time. Then, in front of everyone, he held up the card. "From this day," he said, "this belongs to her, and so does my trust." The hall erupted in shock. Maria's knees nearly buckled. She had never expected this, never dreamed it. She clutched the edge of the table to steady herself. The billionaire leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You've reminded me of something I forgot. That wealth without purpose is emptiness. Thank you." Tears burned her eyes, but she held them back. "I don't need thanks," she whispered. "I just need a chance to make things better." And she did. In the weeks that followed, Maria used the card not for herself, but for others. Her mother's medicines were delivered without delay. Her niece walked proudly to school in new shoes. Families in her neighborhood found food on their tables, roofs repaired, children with books in their hands. Each small act lit a spark, until the sparks became a quiet fire of change. The billionaire watched it unfold, astonished. For years he had tested people and found only greed. Now for the first time he saw generosity multiplied. And it was not the women with their jewels who taught him this. It was the maid who once believed she was invisible. One evening, as the sun fell over the sea, Maria stood on the mansion's balcony. The storm had passed, the horizon glowing gold. She held the card loosely in her hand, no longer afraid of its power. She knew now it wasn't the card that made her strong. It was her choice. The billionaire joined her, quiet for a long while. Finally he asked, "Do you know why I gave it to you?" She smiled faintly. "Because you saw I would not waste it. And because you reminded me that the rarest wealth is a heart that gives." For the first time, Maria allowed herself to breathe deeply, without fear. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was proof that one person, even a maid, could shift the weight of an entire world. If you had the chance to use an unlimited card to change lives, not your own but others, what would you do first? Leave your thoughts below, because sometimes the smallest ideas can inspire the biggest change. Thank you for staying with this story. If it moved you, please like, share and subscribe. And don't forget to comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps stories like this alive, and there's another one waiting for you in the next video.